This week there's a lot of talk about how the law works, how judiciary law works, obviously in the case of federal law versus state law and so on and so forth, which I don't want to give any kind of commentary on that. That's totally out of my league. But I would like to share with you a thought about this week's Torah portion, which actually does talk about that a little bit. Which is interesting because it talks about creation of the world, right? God creating the heavens and the earth, the sun and the moon, and yet how does that have to do with law, right? So I'd like to share with you an interesting insight. The Torah tells us how God creates the sun and the moon, and then the Torah says that God makes the moon smaller. Why does that happen? What's the background for those whole stories? So the Talmud has a very fascinating story, and it says as follows, that God creates the sun and the moon equal sized in power. The sun is going to shine by day and the moon's going to shine by night. And it says that the moon comes and complains to God and says, God, doesn't work like that. You can't make two powerful luminaries. It's going to be like a struggle. Who's going to be stronger? Who's going to be more powerful? Almost like if you want to compare it to the state versus federal, right? Who has a stronger constitution? Which law should be more powerful? So God says, no problem. You don't like the way it is, moon? I will make you a little smaller and you will benefit from the power of the sun. But then it says this moon started complaining because I said something, therefore you're going to make me smaller, you're going to diminish me. So God says, don't worry. When Mashiach comes at the end of the days, I'll make you bigger and you'll become even greater than the sun. And that is why those Jews actually are compared to the moon. The sun is always very, very strong, but the moon benefits from the sun. But it has a cycle. Every month it gets small, but that's true. But then it gets bigger again. And eventually when Mashiach comes, the moon will be even stronger than the sun. But here's a fascinating lesson that we take from this. And the famous Shalat teaches us. It says as follows, that the sun is compared to the written Torah, and the moon is compared to the oral law. Now here's a fascinating thing. Both of these Torahs God gave to Moses at Mount Sinai, the written and the oral teachings. Both God taught Moses. However, the written Torah is explained in the way that God gave it to us, and the oral Torah is as if we received it, not so much the way God gave it to us, but as if we received from generation to generation, and the teachers, the rabbis, and so on and so forth, have to derive from the Torah. We learn, we question, we try to figure things out, and over time, sometimes you have to, I don't want to say adjust, but figure out how do we relate to it to this generation. So although the Torah itself, the written words, no one can ever change even one iota, even one letter, even one vowel of what the Torah is written, but the oral traditions, that with time, we have to continuously figure out how do we adjust it to our times. Not change, but how to apply it to our times. And this is something very interesting. That's why the Torah is called a Mesorah, a tradition that's passed on from generation to generation, teacher to student. But the Torah itself, the written Torah, is given to us by God. So the Torah is given versus the written Torah, the oral tradition is received. And it's two different words to explain the same kind of concept. Just like the sun is the provider of the light, while the moon receives from the Torah. So we have these two concepts of the sun and the moon, written Torah versus the oral Torah. And they go hand in hand. But at the end of the day, we always remember there's one creator of the sun and the moon. There's one provider of the written and the oral Torah. So although we approach them from two different perspectives, two different aspects, at the same time, we'll never forget who provides both of these Torahs. And I think this is something that we have to always remember. And this week, last few days, we were hearing all the testimony and all these questions and so on and so forth, not to get to the details of were they good questions, not good questions, and so on and so forth. That's totally irrelevant to our conversation. But we have to always remember that the Torah is here to shed light on our life and to give us a more meaningful life and a deeper connection to God. And this week, we start reading the Torah from new. We start from Bereshit, from Genesis. This is an opportunity for us to re-embrace learning of the Torah, look at it from a deeper perspective, and hopefully to be able to implement it into our lives in a more meaningful and soulful way. Shabbat Shalom.